Biruni recognized that Indians were advanced in some areas of mathematics and astronomy. He considered himself a student of Indian scholars when he first arrived in India. Indian scholars came to appreciate Biruni's analyses of their work, and even sought his views on astronomy. Biruni did note flaws in their analyses, usually in their mathematics. Biruni critiqued the work of the Indian mathematician and astronomer Brahmagupta, whose work had inspired him in his youth. Brahmagupta's contributions included the concept of zero, the decimal system, negative numbers, sine tables, and a precise calculation of pi. Biruni scrutinized and corrected Brahmagupta's measurements of distances to the moon and the radii of the moon and earth. Biruni translated one of the works of the Indian polymath Varahamihira, but found his reasoning sloppy and his mathematics worse. He was also critical of another commentator named Balabhodra. Biruni considered the astronomer Aryabhata and his followers to be men of great scientific achievement. Biruni analyzed astronomical assumptions found in Hindu religious literature such as the Puranas, including the concept of the egg of Brahman. He concluded that the differences in traditions from these sources could not be rationally accounted for. Biruni explored Indian concepts of time, expanding on his previous research in his chronologies. He saw research as an ongoing process driven by new evidence. Biruni methodically recorded geographical data, listing cities with their latitudes and longitudes, and noting the direction of roads and rivers. He only provided precise data on lengths that he himself had confirmed. Biruni was critical of some aspects of Indian science, tracing flaws to Hinduism itself, while also congratulating Indian thinkers for their knowledge of the laws of nature. Biruni provided a detailed analysis of Hindu beliefs, both as explained by Brahmins and as understood by the common people. He stated he would present the theories of Hindus exactly as they were. He examined the Hindu concepts of gods, noting their ideas on the subject were not well developed. He translated passages from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras from Sanskrit to Arabic and offered his own commentary, comparing it with Muslim Sufis and Christian mystics. Biruni compared and contrasted Hinduism with Islam, focusing on differences such as the concept of metempsychosis. He noted that the Brahmin caste was the bearer of Hinduism's intellectual heritage. He examined Hindu rituals and customs in detail and explained their origins. He argued that religious sculptures and images originated from the human desire to commemorate the dead and console the living. Biruni critiqued Hindu sciences that prey on ignorance, like alchemy and astrology, even though these were practiced in the Muslim world. Biruni's method included using quantitative data in the study of human culture. He considered assertions regarding astronomy and geodesy invalid if they were not subject to quantitative verification. Biruni understood the link between language and thought, recognizing the challenge this posed for human communication. Biruni maintained a non-judgmental approach to his subject matter, assuring his Muslim readers that he was still part of their world. 13. The Canon of Medicine. The chapter, The Canon of Medicine, focuses on Ibn Sina's most famous work, its structure, content, and lasting influence. It details the canon's development, its blend of theory and practice, and its impact on medical education for centuries. The Canon of Medicine was conceived in Gorgan, shortly after Ibn Sina turned 40. He worked on the first volume in Gorgan and Ray, and the next 3 volumes while serving as vizier in Hamadan and as a captive in Fardakan. He finished the final volume in Isfahan. The entire work took almost 2 decades to complete. The Canon is a comprehensive work that covers both the theory and practice of medicine, with thousands of entries. It is approximately 2,500 pages long in modern translations. The Canon is divided into 5 volumes. Volume I presents the philosophical basis of medicine, general themes of anatomy, psychology, the causes of disease and health, and gerontology. It also covers therapeutic procedures and pain relief. This volume is divided into sections on theory and practice, following the structure of Al-Majusi's complete book of the art of medicine. Ibn Sina begins with a definition of medicine drawn from Galen, the science by which we learn the various states of the human body in health, and when not in health and, when lost, is likely to be restored back to health. He argues that understanding the causes and origins of diseases requires a knowledge of both symptoms and the principles of being. He explains the four causes of health and disease as defined by Aristotle: material, efficient, formal, and final. He also discusses the elements that define causation in medicine, humors, and temperaments. Volume 2 is a detailed listing of medical substances and their properties. Volume 3 covers the diagnosis and treatment of illnesses specific to single organs of the body. Volume 4 deals with illnesses that affect the body as a whole. Volume V returns to the theme of pharmacology, offering formulas for the preparation and testing of hundreds of medical compounds and their specific use. Ibn Sina's understanding of pharmacopoeia covered medicines, stimulants for athletes, drugs to prevent memory loss, cosmetics, and products for coloring hair. It included substances like oyster shells, smoke of frankincense, scorpions, and salamander excrement. He provided advice on the clinical use of wine, beer, opium, marijuana, and hashish. Each entry is identified by its name in Arabic, followed by details on its preparation, use, and dosage. Ibn Sina's researchers drew from more than 24 sources, ancient and modern, and from the knowledge of practicing apothecaries. Ibn Sina structured his work using the logic of Aristotle. He saw medicine as a subordinate field within physics, which in turn is founded on metaphysics. He also incorporated Galen's ideas, particularly the theory of the four humors. He believed the basic reality of the universe and human life is spirit, not matter. He also believed that God brought about creation, and that spirit is present in every human being as consciousness, mind, or soul. He saw the link between body and soul as breath, stating that the beginning of breath is a divine emanation, and that God created the left side of the heart to serve as a storehouse for breath. Ibn Sina's work included innovations, such as the antiseptic qualities of alcohol, and he also emphasized the importance of clinical trials for new medicines, establishing 11 rules for testing medicinal compounds. Ibn Sina emphasized the need for doctors to be free of medical conditions that could affect their judgment. They should have normal urinary and bowel functions, be free of fatigue and emotional preoccupations, and have regular breathing under control. The canon covers a range of topics including preventative medicine, diet, exercise, childcare, bathing, massages, and travel. He advises travelers to purge their bowels before a journey, wrap a warm fabric around their midsection, and smear their feet with warmth-inducing oils. Ibn Sina also addresses the medical needs of the lean, the obese, the disease-prone, and the elderly, using mostly non-invasive lifestyle changes and plant-based medicines. Ibn Sina used observation and categorization as his main analytic technique, since there was no instrument for measuring temperatures. He paid close attention to the pulse, urine, and feces as diagnostic tools. He understood the problem of pain, using psychological factors to benefit the patient. He described various surgical interventions, but was not a surgeon himself and focused more on diagnosis. Ibn Sina also wrote shorter pieces and poems to promote the canon, such as Discourse on the Principles of Cardiac Medicine and a poem on medicine. Ibn Sina's researchers used more than 24 sources, ancient and modern, including Romans, Byzantine Greeks, and Indians. They also had access to the knowledge of practicing apothecaries. Ibn Sina's canon served as the basis for medical education and practice in the Middle East, Europe, and parts of India for 6 centuries, and was considered by experts to be the single most enduring work in the history of medicine. The canon was translated into Latin and became widely used in European medical schools. It was also adopted by the Unani school of Indian medicine. The canon inspired confidence with its structure and coherence. However, it did not include open-ended questions for further exploration and did not encourage challenges to its system. This eventually led to its downfall, because the system was seen as more stultifying than invigorating. 14. Biruni's Canon for Masood. The chapter, Biruni's Canon for Masood, details Biruni's work on his Masood's Canon, its purpose, content, and how it differs from Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine. It highlights Biruni's focus on observational astronomy, his rigorous methodology, and his critical approach to previous scientific work. Biruni began writing Masood's Canon after completing his book India, while Mahmud was still alive, though he chose to keep India under wraps at the time. He dedicated the Canon to Mahmud's son and successor, Masood. Biruni was 55 years old at the time, and he had recovered from a medical crisis in 1023. He referred to the work as his Canon, or Canon. The choice of the same title as Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, written 5 years earlier, raises the question of whether Biruni intended his canon as a provocative response. It's possible that Biruni learned of Ibn Sina's activities through copies of his writings reaching Ghazni or through Mahmud's spies. When Masood's troops pilfered Ibn Sina's camel bags at the gate of Isfahan, they found many of his books and sent them to the library at Ghazni, but there is no clear evidence that Biruni read them. The Masood's Canon is a large and complex work, divided into 11 books that focus on observational astronomy, time measurement, and the mathematics required for analysis. It rigorously analyzes the mathematics underlying the Ptolemaic system. Biruni's focus is on mathematical and astronomical arguments, and not on cultural or religious issues. Biruni deviates from his focus twice in Masood's Canon. The first time, he refutes those who still believed the earth was flat, even though most Greek and Muslim astronomers had accepted that it was round. The second time, he turns to the astronomical knowledge of astrologers, although he considered astrology to be an absurd pseudoscience. However, his aim was not to refute them, but to use any useful astronomical data they may have gathered in the course of their studies. The Masood's Canon was not intended to be an encyclopedia of scientific knowledge, unlike Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine. Biruni believed that each area of science required its own rigorous analysis, and that generalizations without such study would be worthless. Biruni considered all sciences to be constantly evolving, and thought an encyclopedia would not remain relevant for long. The Masood's Canon is not a passive summary of previous thinkers' work. Biruni referenced ancient and modern astronomers and mathematicians, but did not accept anything simply on authority. He critiqued both Ptolemy and recent Muslim astronomers, correcting their errors. The Masood's Canon is not a reference work or educational text. It was written for a small audience of experts who had the same level of knowledge as Biruni. The Masood's Canon does not provide a comprehensive view of any field of science or philosophy. Its focus was on the knowledge that he had personally verified through mathematics. While it includes information on geodesy, it only serves to illustrate his mathematical and astronomical arguments. It leaves out the religious and cultural issues that were the focus of his chronology and India. The Masood's Canon is best understood as an open-ended report of a lifetime's research on the Earth, Moon, Sun, stars, and cosmos. Biruni frequently admits when he was unable to pursue a line of research further. For example, he provides a critique of Ptolemy's method of estimating the Sun's diameter and distance from Earth, but admits he was unable to proceed further. He calculated that several centuries would have to pass before a total solar eclipse would be visible in Afghanistan, which would allow him to calculate the Sun's diameter. Biruni accepted Ptolemy's concept of a spherical universe, but challenged his predecessor's measurements of the movement of the fixed stars on a central axis. Biruni's calculation of a degree every 70 1/3 years is the closest to the modern measurement. He also measured the sun's apogee more precisely than anyone before him, and measured the solar year with great accuracy. Biruni presented the mathematical processes he used in his work, making his data reproducible and verifiable, which is an important step in developing the scientific method. Biruni's passion for measurement led him to trace all concepts of time to their underlying assumptions and unify them under a single global system. Biruni hypothesized the existence of North and South America as inhabited continents. Biruni considered the placement of the Earth and Sun in the solar system as a technical and theoretical issue, not a religious one. He mathematically embraced the idea of the Sun being at the center of the solar system, anticipating Renaissance astronomers. Biruni embraced the idea of elliptical rather than circular orbits, advancing towards the laws of planetary motion that Kepler would later propound. Biruni used empirical data from his own observations and instruments, acknowledging and applying methods developed by others. He often compared his own instruments with Ptolemy's and found the latter wanting. Biruni's writings often jumped from issue to issue, but in Masud's canon, he narrowed his focus to mathematics and astronomy unless other issues were essential to those topics. Although a Muslim, he rarely mentions God, except as the prime mover. His canon is not anti-religious, but it remains free of theology, metaphysics, and mysticism. Biruni intended his canon as a time-bound research report based on his own explorations and those of his Greek and Indian predecessors. Biruni's conclusions were entirely his own, the result of his research in Ghazni. 15. The chapter The Cure details Ibn Sina's grand synthesis of knowledge, Al-Shifa, known as the Cure, its purpose, structure, content, and significance. It explores how Ibn Sina's philosophical and metaphysical ideas are integrated into his scientific views, and how they relate to his other works, including the canon of medicine. Ibn Sina's goal in writing the Cure was to address ignorance, which he considered an illness, and to heal the soul. He aimed to provide a comprehensive system of knowledge that was both logical and spiritually satisfying. The Cure is divided into sections that correspond to Aristotle's categories of knowledge, which include logic, physics, mathematics, and metaphysics. The mathematical sciences include geometry, arithmetic, music, and astronomy. Each of these main categories is further subdivided into other fields. Ibn Sina devoted considerable attention to philosophy and metaphysics in the Cure, focusing on the fundamental nature of reality, including mathematics, astronomy, and cosmology. Ibn Sina began the Cure while still in Hamadan, as his students were working on the second volume of his canon of medicine. He drew extensively on his earlier writings, but he also rethought many of his earlier positions as he wrote. Although Ibn Sina was a follower of Aristotle, by the time he completed the Cure, he had respectfully declared his independence from his ancient mentors. While incarcerated at Fardakan, Ibn Sina wrote several minor pieces, including a study on colitis that made its way into the canon, and 2 allegories, The Guidance and Alive, Son of Awake, in which he summarized his philosophy. He also composed a short treatise on the allegory of the Prophet Muhammad's ascent to heaven. The structure of the Cure is based on Aristotle's categories of knowledge, with the 4 main divisions being logic, physics, mathematics, and metaphysics. Each division is further divided into subheadings covering an entire sphere of knowledge. Metaphysics involves the study of the fundamental nature of reality, including cosmology. Ibn Sina's treatment of subjects in the Cure largely follows well-known paths, but he also offered some surprises, such as proposing a mathematical relationship between an object's weight in motion and its velocity. Epistemology, which considers the processes of cognition and reasoning, was central to Ibn Sina's thinking in the Cure, as it had been at the beginning of his career. Ibn Sina's contact with the Ismailis may have influenced his thinking, leading him to philosophize in a way that was neither strictly Sunni nor mainstream Shiite. He embraced elements of mysticism that were beyond the reach of logic and rational proofs, unlike the rational Aristotle. Ibn Sina argues that the process of ordering the material world ceases only when the active intelligence establishes order and the good of the material world. This order does not come about through God's direct intervention, but because the process emanates from God. He affirmed that the universe is comprehensible and benign. Ibn Sina's view of the human soul is that it is independent of the body, and that it is immortal. The sense-bound soul perishes with the body, but the rational soul lives on, surviving the body's death. He did not believe in the transmigration of souls. Ibn Sina discussed the estimative faculty, which is the ability to make judgments based on experience, and posited that animals also possess this faculty. In The Cure, Ibn Sina relies on logic, imagination, and rational mysticism, acknowledging the complexity of human consciousness and opening a door to less rational perceptions of reality. Ibn Sina's theses on God, the soul, and logic form the foundation for his analysis of the physical universe, the natural world, and all its contents. He delved into areas such as geodesics, astronomy, mathematics, music, and medicine to show how God interacts with humankind. While The Cure covers a vast range of topics, Ibn Sina's main goal was to demonstrate the relationship of each topic to the cosmic order, as set out in detail in his Metaphysics. He believed that science, like everything else in nature, has a purpose, which is to reveal the harmony and order that govern the universe and to show the natural sympathy between the microcosm and macrocosm. Ibn Sina drew heavily on Euclid's Elements and Ptolemy's Almagest for his treatment of mathematics, astronomy, and physics. He also drew on other sources such as Archimedes, Aryabhata, Al-Khwarizmi, and Brahmagupta, but does not mention his contemporaries Biruni, Ibn Iraq, or Buzjani. Ibn Sina includes music in the mathematics section of The Cure, drawing from Ptolemy and Al-Farabi. Through syllogistic logic, Ibn Sina sought to demonstrate the interconnectedness of all knowledge and its dependence on God. He also aimed to update ancient learning in terms of these principles. By the time he finished The Cure, Ibn Sina had not merely updated Aristotle, but had in many respects supplanted him. Ibn Sina's work was criticized by the fundamentalist Ash'arites for his logic, but it also resonated with Muslim law, Sharia, and the words of Sufi Abu Zakaria Yahya al-Razi. The Cure was not intended for the general reader, and Ibn Sina believed that common people could not understand beyond symbols and allegory. The Cure completes the project that began with the translation of ancient Greek works into Arabic, and marks the start of fresh debates that would extend for more than half a millennium. 16. Biruni's Encore. The chapter Biruni's Encore details Biruni's activities and works after completing his Masud's canon, highlighting his shift in focus towards mineralogy and pharmacology, while still maintaining his critical approach to science and astrology. After completing his Masud's canon, Biruni continued his scholarly pursuits, dedicating his next book, Mineralogy, to Sultan Maudud. Biruni's interest in minerals dated back to his youth in Kath and Gurganj, where he was introduced to the challenge of weighing minerals by Ibn Iraq, and even wrote a treatise on the subject. Biruni's interest in rare minerals and metals was further sparked during his time in Ray, where he roomed with two young gemstone dealers. He also composed a speculative piece in Gorgon on the relationship of the masses of gemstones and metals. His works, Determination of the Coordinates of Cities and India, also contained information on minerals and their relation to geological history and economics. In his final decade, Biruni focused on mineralogy and pharmacology, fields that seemed far removed from his lifelong passions. Biruni compiled a complete listing of Razi's works and appended to it a bibliography of his own writings, using bibliography as a cover for biography. Biruni approached the Razi project with caution, mirroring how he dealt with the sensitive subjects of astrology and alchemy. Biruni had devoted an entire book and several shorter treatises to astrology as a young scientist in Gorgon, and had written about it in his chronologies and in the determination of the coordinates of cities. He also produced a now-lost volume on the astronomical basis for Indian astrology. During his later years, Biruni composed a compendious volume of questions and answers concerning astrology for Rayhana bint al-Hasan, a member of the Khwarazm elite. Although he was formally employed as an astrologer, Biruni considered astrology to be an absurd pseudoscience. He was interested in garnering whatever useful astronomical data astrologers might have gained in their studies. He also approached the topic of alchemy with caution. Biruni's last research project was a 400-page compendium on pharmaceutical plants. It is possible that he was inspired or goaded by Ibn Sina's canon of medicine on the same topic, though Biruni did not mention his old rival by name. Biruni engaged a medical doctor named Ahmad ibn Noshai to assist him, but Biruni died before completing the book, leaving Noshai to finish it. Biruni's book on pharmacology transformed the field, examining 1,116 medicinal plants and their products, whereas his main source, Dioscorides, enumerated 570 and Ibn Sina 400. Biruni's book on pharmacology was a comparative study of languages that challenged readers to explore that area. Biruni made observations on politics, economics, ethics, and the origins of human societies. He inquired into the origins of society and wealth, treading new ground. Biruni remained an optimist, continuing his research and writing, railing against spurious science and sloppy thinking, and believing that science is an unending process extending deep into the future. Biruni believed devoutly in progress. He wished for a long life and sufficient strength to continue his work. Biruni continued to maintain contact with old colleagues and friends, such as Abu el-Hasan al-Valvaliji, a jurist whom Biruni questioned about Muslim contract law, just before he died. Biruni's final words were, "Is it not better for me to leave this world knowing the answer to this question than not knowing it?" 17. Ibn Sina's Encore. The chapter, Ibn Sina's Encore, details Ibn Sina's activities and works during his time in Isfahan, highlighting his prolific writing, his completion of major works such as the Canon of Medicine and the Cure, and his continued evolution as a thinker. Ibn Sina's time in Isfahan was a period of high productivity due to his comfortable circumstances as a high-ranking official, which gave him the resources to focus on writing. He had a team of assistants to help with tasks like culling old books, rewriting, editing, and copying, which allowed him to produce a large volume of work. During his stay in Isfahan, Ibn Sina completed the last 3 volumes of the Canon of Medicine, which totaled nearly 3,000 pages, and the final sections of the Cure, which added another 1,000 pages. He also wrote further treatises, essays, poems, and letters. He completed his canon about the same time he finished the final section of the Cure, on astronomy, which was an abridgment of Ptolemy's Almagest. Ibn Sina's patron, the Emir Ala al-Dawla, funded observational instruments for astronomy, several of which Ibn Sina himself designed. Ala al-Dawla also commissioned Ibn Sina to create a shorter version of the Cure, which was to be an abridgment of a summary of a compilation. Ibn Sina delegated most of this task to his secretary, Juzjani, but kept the section on philosophy for himself. Ibn Sina also drafted for Ala al-Dawla a treatise on the benefits and harms of wine and one on colitis, both of which likely pertained directly to the emir's own condition. Ibn Sina remained a seeker to the end, constantly clarifying, amplifying, and even modifying positions he had adopted over the years. Although none of these explanatory texts survive, their contents are known through brief passages embedded in the works of later authors. His final works show that his views on human consciousness and on God remained in flux down to his final days. In fair judgment, Ibn Sina offered responses to questions posed by students and correspondents after they read the Cure. It is in this work that Ibn Sina, for the first time, commented on Aristotle's Theologia, showing his deepening interest in theology. This commentary was a further step toward Ibn Sina's emancipation from Aristotle and the Peripatetics. In Pointers and Reminders, Ibn Sina declared his full independence from Aristotle. He introduced original elements into his system of metaphysics, drawn from his own thinking. During the last phase of his life, Ibn Sina's thoughts drew him increasingly towards mysticism, reflected in his use of mystical terminology and symbolism, as well as in the elusive and poetic style of his final works. He composed 3 visionary narratives or recitals, all of which are now lost, and his final piece on the soul, in which he asserted that love pervades the cosmos. Ibn Sina shared his mystical and visionary writings with only a select few whom he considered truly enlightened, not with the general public, to whom he recommended only his official works. He forbade his acolytes from sharing his esoteric writings with outsiders. By 1034, Ibn Sina's health had worsened, and he was forced to flee again with the Emir of Isfahan, but he recovered enough to resume some of his old duties and routines. Ibn Sina's condition deteriorated to such an extent that he had to be carried on a litter, and he eventually died when one of his internal organs ulcerated. Having long since declared that he would prefer an expansive life to a long one, Ibn Sina gave up. He noted that the governor that used to rule his body was too weak to rule any longer, so treatment would be of no further avail. 18. Biruni and Ibn Sina through the ages. The chapter, Biruni and Ibn Sina through the ages, explores the reception and influence of Biruni and Ibn Sina's works from their time to the present day, highlighting the differences in how their contributions were received and their impact on both the Muslim world and Europe. Reception in the Muslim world. Ibn Sina's canon of medicine was widely embraced in the Muslim world and became integrated into everyday medical practice, with many prominent centers of Anani medicine still bearing his name. Ibn Sina's philosophical works, especially his metaphysics and cosmology, sparked debate and division. Some theologians attempted to integrate his ideas into Muslim theology. Theologians of Kalam, both Sunni and Shiite, competed to claim his legacy, with the Asharite school ultimately embracing him to assure his place within strict orthodoxy. Many readers chose to engage with Ibn Sina's thought through his concise pointers and reminders, rather than his more extensive works like The Cure. Ibn Sina's ideas influenced later thinkers who both championed and critiqued him, and by the 17th century, Persian theologians were appropriating and transforming his ideas. Biruni's works were not as widely known or integrated into the mainstream of Muslim thought. Few intellectuals in Syria, Egypt, and the Maghrib were familiar with his work. His contributions were largely ignored by astronomers in Andalusia. Reception in Europe. Ibn Sina's works, especially his canon of medicine, had a profound impact on Europe. The canon was translated into Latin and became a standard medical text for centuries. Ibn Sina's philosophical works were studied by churchmen, but his canon found a wider audience among medical experts and the literate public. Ibn Sina's metaphysics sparked intense debates in Europe, particularly regarding the role of angels and the nature of the soul. Some European thinkers viewed Ibn Sina as a wise man, while others saw him as a wizard or a Dr. Faustus figure. His ideas were debated in relation to issues like the eternity of the world, human psychology, and the nature of miracles. Thomas Aquinas used arguments from Ibn Sina in his disputes with those who followed Averroes. Biruni's works were largely unknown in Europe during this time. Though his India had been consulted in Sicily, his works were not part of the translation movement in Toledo. Roger Bacon had access to works by Ibn Sina, Kindi, and Farabi, but not Biruni. Rediscovery and modern reception. Biruni was rescued from obscurity through the efforts of scholars like George Sarton, who emphasized the importance of studying original Arabic sources. Sarton's introduction to the history of science brought attention to Biruni and other medieval Eastern scientists. Both Biruni and Ibn Sina have experienced a renewed interest in recent times, with scholars reintegrating their work into mainstream thought. The 1000th anniversaries of their births were celebrated globally, indicating a recognition of their contributions. Ibn Sina's star shone bright for a long time but waned as modern medicine and science advanced and secularism spread, while Biruni's star rose after half a millennium of neglect. Key differences in impact: Ibn Sina's comprehensive and closed systems, like the canon of medicine and the cure, had a wide but potentially limiting impact. His work was either accepted, rejected, or refined by later scholars. Biruni's open-ended approach to science stimulated further research, building on his findings but advancing beyond them. Biruni's works stimulated further research that built on his achievements, embodying the best qualities of scientific inquiry. Philosophical and religious impact: both Biruni and Ibn Sina were Muslims, but they used reason to discover truths about humanity and the universe. They challenged the notion of ancients versus moderns, and they embraced both science and religion, challenging the idea of an eternal struggle between science and faith. Their work was studied in both the East and West and rose above sectarianism, dissolving cultural divides. Ibn Sina's ideas were incorporated into the 3 religions of the book, and his canon of medicine remained dominant in medical pedagogy for centuries. 19. Biruni and Ibn Sina. A Millennium on. The chapter Biruni and Ibn Sina, A Millennium on reflects on how the world's view of Biruni and Ibn Sina has changed over time, noting the shifts in perspective due to new ideas, the passage of time, and the re-evaluation of their contributions. Shifting perspectives: the world's view of both Biruni and Ibn Sina has changed significantly due to new ideas that challenge previously held certainties. The relentless passage of time, causing perspectives to alter, often without conscious awareness. Ibn Sina's influence was prominent for most of the period following his death, but waned due to the rise of modern medicine and science, the spread of secularism in the West, and the surge of religious traditionalism in the Muslim world. Biruni was neglected for about half a millennium, but has recently gained recognition, primarily among specialists. Despite these fluctuations, both men's importance is once again rising. Enduring legacy and recognition: despite attempts to erase his legacy, Biruni's name is memorialized in various forms. A crater on the far side of the Moon bears his name. An asteroid is named 9936 al-Biruni. A university in Istanbul and other learned institutions worldwide also carry his name. Ibn Sina's legacy is similarly recognized. His mausoleum dominates a plaza in Hamadan, Iran, featuring a distinctive pencil-like tower. More than a dozen hospitals and medical schools worldwide bear his name. Both figures are jointly honored at the United Nations office in Vienna, where they are depicted in large modernistic statues. Divergent approaches and impacts: Ibn Sina offered his works as closed, complete systems, whereas Biruni presented his studies as part of an ongoing process. Ibn Sina proceeded from the general to the specific, sometimes overlooking unexplained differences, while Biruni readily acknowledged and explored diversity. Biruni believed that what is known is insignificant compared to what is knowable, emphasizing the partial and unclear nature of current knowledge. Biruni reveled in the diversity of geography, culture, and time, and developed methods for studying it. He also understood the profound differences between high and popular cultures, and sought the factors that shaped them. Religious and philosophical perspectives: both Biruni and Ibn Sina have been the subject of much debate regarding their religious beliefs. Both affirmed God's mastery over the universe, rejected the Greek notion of the eternity of the world, and stood apart from the Sunni-Shia controversy. Both considered themselves Muslims whose identities were inseparable from their faith. Biruni saw Islam as uniting different nations, and believed the Quran was accessible through reason. Biruni often used the Quran to defend his positions against critics. While they were both avowed Muslims, their work transcended sectarianism, making it accessible to diverse audiences. They constructively engaged with differences between Muslim, Christian, and Jewish traditions, dissolving what some consider to be a global clash of cultures. They rejected orthodoxy, transforming the received intellectual heritage. Relevance to contemporary times, the new states of Central Asia are emerging from a period of colonial rule, during which their intellectual and spiritual heritage was damaged. Iran has a rich cultural and scientific heritage, but is controlled by religious zealots. Afghanistan, where Ibn Sina's ancestors originated and where Biruni conducted significant research, is now controlled by religious fanatics similar to those in the medieval era. Conclusion: Biruni and Ibn Sina were intellectual virtuosos who reached the peak of human achievement. Their differences highlight the breadth and depth of the Central Asian and Persianate culture from which they emerged. Their lives and works continue to offer insights into the expansion of human knowledge, transcending time, place, religion, and politics.